Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. You can see we're here today with our Cub Cadet 149. You can see we're in the midst of some other repairs while we're at it, which of course there's a playlist for this tractor where we've done all sorts of repairs. You can go get caught up and we'll link it right up there for you. But what we're here to deal with today is the transmission leak that has beat me for the last 2 years. I think it's time to get into it and see if we can actually get it fixed this year. So this project ended up taking more twists and turns than a Formula One race by the time I got done. So I'm going to give you the too long didn't watch right now. If you have a 149 and you have a transmission leak right back here where you see this blue thing on mine. So if you know you're not leaking back here or anywhere else and you're leaking between this part here and the rest of the pump, there's an O-ring in here that you need to service. Or if you're leaking at the front of the pump, there's a front lip seal up here that you can also service. To do that, there are just 2 bolts. So there's one per side. You need to take the drive shaft adapter out, and there's just a pin in it that you drive out, and that comes out. Of course, you need to remove the drive shaft. And the torque spec on these bolts is 52 pounds. Draw them down evenly, and you're done. Mine didn't go that way at all. It looks like my tractor might be a weird amalgamation of parts or like a mid-year model change or something weird, which doesn't surprise me. If you want to come along with the saga, there's a lot of fun stuff ahead. We did a lot of interesting things. We did some 3D printing and everything else to get this thing to quit leaking, I hope. Let's jump in. And this is not an overly small leak we're talking about. I don't think I remembered to put this drain bucket under it until probably December or January. It had been parked for a couple months at that point already. And you can see in there it's collected probably about half a cup of hydraulic fluids in that time, just hanging out for 3 or 4 months, just a steady drip. We certainly need to get it taken care of. And there are a few possibilities for what's going on. A real common place for these things to leak would be around these relief valves, but mine actually look dry. Last year when I was looking at it, it actually looks like it's leaking between like we'll call it the pump adapter and the pump body itself, that there's a housing that comes off. And there's an O-ring that goes between those 2 portions. There's also like a front shaft seal up here where the drive shaft comes out of the thing. And there's a bearing in here too that, since we're going to be in there, I went ahead and got a new one just in case that one's bad. But the very first thing we need to do before we can work on anything is to get this thing cleaned up. My original plan was just to wheel the thing outside and pressure wash it, but the weather just isn't cooperating with me. Within like the last 2 hours, there were snow flurries outside, and I just don't want to deal with trying to winterize the pressure washer and all that crap just to, in 3 weeks, get it back out and blah, blah, blah. So we're going to clean this off old school. And I also thought it might be kind of cool because not everybody has a pressure washer. So just how do you clean crap like this up? And my answer for that, at least for the first step, is I'm just going to start simply wiping it down with just a regular old shop towel here, just a paper towel. And we'll probably get, I would guess, 80% of this garbage off of it. I do also have a significant amount of cardboard under it on the floor just to collect some of this crap, because this is dust mixed with oil, so it's sort of like grease and just nothing too good. So let's just start here and just start wiping garbage away. And you can see just by giving it a simple wipe down, we've actually achieved quite a bit. The next thing I think I'm going to do is I'm going to take the drive shaft out of the thing, because we're going to have to take this coupler off anyway to be able to pop the housing apart, or I'm pretty sure we will. And I think what we're going to do is just drive that roll pin out of it right there and get everything unbolted. And hopefully this will slide enough that we don't have to actually drop the drive pin and stuff out of the other end of this drive shaft if we can get that pin out. They're not leaving us a whole lot of clearance to work around these lines, so I kind of have to come into it from the side, which doesn't give me much room to hold the punch to swing it with a hammer. Let's try it and see. Came right out, no sweat. That's cool. See if we can just grab it out of the other side. And sweet, didn't even drop it on the floor. That was too easy. This is going to go badly. Now we just need to disconnect our bolts and such to get that drive biscuit out of there and freed up. And this is when we do our best to not break the fan. All right, let's see if we can get lucky and get enough slack to could jigger with. I doubt it. It's not looking like it. Yeah, it looks like we're not going to luck out. Looks like I can't push that guy back in any further than it pretty much is. So got to take the gas tank and all that crap off to be able to drive the pin out of the other end. So fun times. Unless maybe we can get it in a position to finagle the disc out, but I don't think so. Nah, plus it'll be a nightmare to try and get it back in anyway. So, time to pull the gas tank and stuff. And that is what I did. If you guys want to see more details on how to pull the drive shaft and gas tank and all that stuff out of one of these, I've got a video I did last year that I'll link up above where I went over that pretty well. But moving on with this, all I have done here so far is just dry wipe all this with just a paper towel. And you can see that all came up pretty clean. But since we are actually going to be accessing transmission internals, I'm just going to take some brake clean now on a paper towel and just kind of give it another little wipe down and hopefully lift any extra grease or chunks or anything like that, because we want to prevent as much of that from going in there as we possibly can. So although these tractors are old and kind of valueless, and even the parts aren't too expensive, I paid 75 bucks for the rear axle that's in this one. I don't particularly want to do it if I don't have to, so I'd rather just try and save what we have from being destroyed. Plus then it leaves another one out there for somebody who actually needs it. This one works just fine, it's just leaky. And I think we want to clean around this drive shaft input pretty thoroughly as well, because I think it might stay behind when I pull that housing. I've never done this, so I don't know. We'll find out together. And you can see as far as old greasy tractors go, that's pretty clean. That's the last round we got off with our rag, and it's looking pretty good. So I think we're ready to just start tearing into it and see what we find. Make sure we get our drain pan sort of under it, so I don't know how much fluid we're going to have in any one particular place. It looks like there's only so much view you guys can really get to this, and I apologize for that. I'm making do with the equipment and the stuff I have. But I think all we need to do is remove these two 5/8 bolts down here. Let's find out. I'd laugh if they were both just loose. That one's not. That one certainly wasn't either. I see oil. Don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign. We'll see if the O-ring is supposed to be inside of the bolt holes or outside of them. That one is dry, so I'm going to guess we got an O-ring failure over here. See if I can use a bolt. Yep, use a bolted jimmy free. No problem. Let's just give this a straight pull. It smells completely terrible, and something fell out. We're going to have to find that. And this is like the front of the G-rotor pump in the thing. And yeah, that bolt should have not been oily. The O-ring's on the inside. So that is what's happened, is we have an O-ring failure right here. Let's see if we actually did drop something or not. I think I'm going to try and some paper towels and crap to put this stuff on. Poor planning on my part. So first things first, let's examine the carnage here. Here's the O-ring that has failed, and you see that dark mark on the inside all the way around it? That leads me to believe it has been leaking right there. And that staining is actually from the outside world. So we'll do our best to try and get that cleaned up, but we're going to have to be careful because this is actually a mechanical piece in here. This is intended to run around, so we don't want to do anything to introduce any kind of sand or anything like that. So basically I'm just going to rub that with a paper towel and see if it comes off. And the piece we dropped was this dowel that actually engages the other side of the pump, or the other side of the rotor, onto the drive shaft. So there's a hole in the drive shaft, and that little dowel pin just goes in it, and that's what holds it. But this whole little pump is actually pretty cool, and it's called a G-rotor pump. And let's get set up a little bit better so we can talk about how these work, because they're pretty neat. But you can see down inside those dark machined places down in the bottom, or actually they're not machined, they're cast. But those are passageways for oil. And I'm pretty sure on the bottom of this pump is the suction, and on the top side is the pressure. And down on the transmission, you'll see that there are matching ports. So this bottom one would be what I assume is suction, and this top side would be the pressure side. So it's going to suck from here and push into there. So the way these work is these not machined passages on the bottom are actually the suction and the pressure outlets for this thing. So it pulls oil in from this end and pushes it out on that side. And how it does that is you have these set of gears that mesh into each other, except they don't. So you see when you put those gears together, they don't actually line up. That's because as this gear turns, it actually compresses oil in between the two halves, like so. And as this thing goes around, this would be the engine forcing this inner one to be turning, and that'll in turn turn the outer one with it. But as it does that, and it makes all those passages compress, like you can actually see that passage there at the top, when it rotates in and out, it's squeezing the oil down into the gallery. So what happens is when it comes around at the bottom, this thing's just a big open scoop, and it rotates around up to the top. When the oil gets to the top, it ends up getting compressed in these gears and squishes it on and through. And it's a little easier to illustrate the phenomenon if I just rotate the outside portion here. That's kind of the idea how it works. And you can see at the top where those two teeth mesh that it's not a perfect mesh. There's a little cavity left there. That's exactly for oil to go in and out. It works just like that, and that's how it pumps oil. Another thing is I can't tell for sure if these gears actually do have a taper on them or not, so I'm going to have to try and be extra careful that I put it back together the right way, because if I don't, it will shred itself in no time flat. In fact, I may try and go consult a service manual and make sure I don't screw it up. Just kind of a neat piece of engineering maybe some of you guys haven't seen before, so pretty neat. But either way, we need to take the guts out of it as much as we can, just so we can get it cleaned up as much as we can. So I did just take a square to these guys, and as well as I could eyeball them up, and it doesn't look like there's any taper on either one of them. And past that, you can see like that dark colored circle on the inside of this thing. That's a witness mark where it's been running around past these slots in the pump housing. So we know that that gear needs to go back in like that when we get to that point. Likewise, this gear has a witness mark on it, which I think you can see. It's a circular mark just around the inside. So we know that's the face that goes that way. So I think we're all good there. However, the plot thickened. I don't know what this guy's called, so we're just going to call it the pump adapter. This was actually left behind on the transmission. It was on like that. So that was on the transmission, and this guy with the O-ring in it was bolted to the top of it like so. Well, when I took this thing off, I discovered it had a paper gasket on the back of it, which is not in any of the exploded parts diagrams, so I can't even look up the part number to order one, and it's ripped. And I don't know if it was ripped before we started or if we ripped it taken apart, but it's ripped now either way. So now we get to figure out what we're going to do about it. And I'm going to be kind of boned here because it is super thin. It is just a paper gasket, and I don't know what this slot around the outside of it is for. There's no mating feature on the transmission for that. So that's going to be a good time to try and replicate because I don't have anything to like smack it up against. And this is also really thin, like almost like wax paper. And I need to try and get it off of there in one piece if we can. I'm just taking my time. I may get a razor blade here in a second and try and lift it that way if it gets sticky. Like right there, it's getting sticky. Come on, there we go. Actually, it looks like it might actually be plastic. So I don't know what to do about this. It's almost like blister pack material thick, but I don't want to just use something like RTV because we certainly wouldn't want to get that in our pump and screw it up, and plus it might not stack out correctly in terms of thickness. So I have no clue how we're going to come up with one of these. May have to hunt after some Cub Cadet parts dealers and ask them. So at first I thought we would just order some gasket material and try and make one, but now that I see that that's some sort of plastic, I don't think that's what we're going to be doing. But the project stops for now for sure because I can't reassemble crap with this broken thing here. And that ended up being a little bit easier said than done. The pumps on these tractors are actually Sunstrand 15U pumps. And Sunstrand is now owned by Danfoss. Sunstrand as a company, I guess, got merged up and bought and all that crap over the years. But this is exactly the pump I have right here. And I did some research and some reading and stuff, and based on a post I saw on a tractor forum somewhere, someone said, hey, contact SunSource for parts. And this is SunSource. These guys do all sorts of industrial equipment and hydraulic equipment, process pumps, stuff like that. And I kind of, I guess, just foolishly assumed that since they were called SunSource, that they may have at some time been affiliated with Sunstrand, and I don't think that's true. Anyway, contacted them, and they immediately said nope, and they refused to even try and help, which I don't really blame them. Their statement was that, garden tractors and stuff like that use specialized pumps that are all application specific, so they don't have a way to pull parts for them. All right, good enough. Moving on. My next stop was to reach out to Danfoss specifically, since they are the manufacturer of the pumps, and they still, as far as I can tell, make them today. They've got these service manuals and stuff published. You can see, well, I guess it would be this area back here is the part we're working on, and this is the Danfoss manual for that pump. And right there you can even see what we should have versus what we actually have. So I called them up, and the first thing they wanted from me was a part number that should be like stamped on the pump or something down here. And with it in the tractor, there's no way I was going to be able to see that. And I'm not going to split the tractor, meaning pull the whole rear end and everything out of it to try and look up a part number on a pump. Annoyingly, you can see the plate that I think Danfoss was asking me about is right there, right above the filter adapter. So if I had just simply taken the filter off, I might have been able to get that information. I'm going to try and harvest it right now just for the benefit of the future. Kind of hard to do with this thing dripping oil everywhere. It'd be nice if I could quit shaking. There we go. Okay, I think I may actually be able to read that if I work hard enough at it. Plus, on their exploded diagram, the only thing they could see is exactly what the Cub Cadet diagram shows us, which is just this thing being one piece. So they didn't have any further insight to lend me there either. And their response was, well, you're just going to have to replace the whole pump. And I can promise you we're not doing that. And as I mentioned a minute ago, this is the Cub Cadet exploded diagram for my pump, and you see that this piece is just a singular piece. There's no extra gasket or anything in there. I started going through other Cub Cadet models though, and I came up with this exploded diagram, which is for a 125, which it doesn't have a whole lot in common with my tractor. They're different frames, they're different transmissions, there's a whole bunch of different stuff going on between those two models. But it did show exactly the gasket that I'm after. So I went hunting down one of those through various Cub Cadet dealers. And here's kind of a and B comparison of those two exploded diagrams. So you can see at some point in time, this part became one piece where it just used to be, you know, these three pieces here. But otherwise, the whole assembly and theory of operation, everything's the same. So through a Cub Cadet dealer that I'm not going to mention, I managed to find this gasket. And this is the gasket for the 125. And you can see that it's not all that similar to the one we have. When you put the two next to each other, it becomes a little more apparent the differences. You know, my gasket doesn't have this big channel in it, this slot that I still don't know what it does because there's no feature on mine where any of that mates to. This slot goes all the way around, and since it actually blew out in this thin area anyway, I don't really view having extra of that slot as a good thing, since as far as I can see, it doesn't do anything. But anyway, this is the gasket that I was able to find. So I pulled the part number for this thing, and sure enough, it's no longer available from Cub Cadet or MTD themselves because a whole bunch of stuff on these tractors gets discontinued after time. You know, they're 50 years old. So the only place that has one of these things in stock is a specialty Cub Cadet dealer that deals only in these like older garden tractors and stuff. And there are a handful of them out there, and again, I'm not going to tell you which one it was that had this thing. Had 3 of them in stock, and they're I think $9 a piece, and they want $10 to ship any order. And I also happen to be in the same state as this guy, and I'm also a repeat customer. I've been doing business with this guy for like 10 years about all kinds of stuff. I emailed him when I saw this picture, and I said, hey, I'm looking for one of these for my 14.9. I don't know why mine's weird like this, but this is basically what I've got. And I sent him the pictures of the parts that I've showed you guys. And his first answer was also what Dan Foss told me. He's like, nope, you're going to have to replace the whole pump. And it's like, come on, guys. And I responded back to him. I said, hey, you know, I'm a repeat customer. We've done business for a lot of years. Would you be willing to cut me a break on the shipping for this thing for me just to try one? You know, I'm happy to buy it from him. Can you slap this between 2 pieces of cardboard and toss a stamp on it and throw it in the mail for me? And his response was, no, we have $10 flat rate shipping. And if he would have stopped there, it would have been okay. But he didn't. And the next thing he said was, have you tried your local Cub Cadet dealer? Now, basically, he knows full well these are discontinued, or he wouldn't have said that to me, and that rubbed me just completely wrong. Basically, he was the guy on Craigslist that says, you know, I know what I got, no tire kickers, whatever, and maybe I'm more offended by that than I should be, and I might end up eating my words and have to buy his gasket anyway. But what I'm gonna say is, if you are a person that makes it clear in some way that you're difficult to do business with, or you don't want my business, I'll go ahead and oblige you, and I'll do something else. So in this case, we're gonna do something entirely different. And that entirely different thing led me to this. If you guys watch the channel, you know I've bought tons of stuff from McMaster-Carr. I will continue to buy stuff from McMaster-Carr. But one thing I didn't know until I got into this project is that they will custom make any gasket you can send them a drawing for. You have your choice of materials to make them out of. Frankly, none of these materials were quite what I wanted, but I'm kind of taking what I can get and thought I would go down that road and give it a try, because if it's not the tractor today, you know, assuming the gasket that I could just buy actually would work, there are only 3 left in the world as far as I know, and one person owns all 3, and if I were to buy them from that guy, especially at $10 to ship a 1/4 ounce gasket, I would have bought all 3, so then I would have been the guy, and nobody else would have any. So if it wasn't the tractor today where we have a part that's impossible to come up with, it would have been something else in the future. So let's give McMaster a shot and see how it works out. As such, the process for doing this was actually pretty straightforward. I just took the gasket itself and a good old US quarter and put them both in my regular old scanner, not any kind of special 3D scanner or anything like that. Just a regular from Walmart printer scanner, fax, whatever, inkjet combo, kind of thing pretty much everybody has at home that's, you know, $50 these days. Took a scan of it, then I can import this scan into the design software of my choice, which in this case just happened to be SolidWorks. You can use whatever you want. You certainly don't need a seat of SolidWorks to do that. You scan that in and bring it in with a reference of known size, like this quarter that I can measure with my calipers, so you can scale that image so you know that all your sizes are correct as you go. You just draw a sketch on top of it, and from that sketch you can flesh it out into a fully dimensioned sketch. Save it off as a drawing, and away you go to have your stuff laser cut. If you would like to know more about design software and designing stuff like this and scanning and manufacturing and all that kind of stuff, I'm happy to make those kind of videos, but we don't do a lot of that on this channel, so I don't want to get bogged down in the weeds with stuff like that, because that's not what we're really about. But I'd be happy to make a couple of introductory videos, if you want to call them that, or answer questions or whatever. And to answer the next question of what kind of material should we use, the issue I came up with almost immediately is the gasket that was in the tractor is 0.006 inches, which is pretty freaking thin stuff. And I also don't know what kind of pressure or temperature or anything else it needs to hold up to, so I wanted to get something that would be pretty strong, which again puts me into kind of a specialty supplier like McMaster anyway. So I went with 16th inch thick, which could come back to haunt us because that's 0.060 inches, so it is 10 times thicker than it's supposed to be. But that's what we went with. My only other real option here to get down to something as thin that I feel would do the job as well would be something like a sheet of dead soft copper, and just a sheet of copper in a 12 by 12 size or whatever would be probably $100. And then when I do that, I don't have access to the mail order, easy to manufacture McMaster cutting system. So then I would be dealing with like a local machine shop with their laser cutter, and usually laser cutters are anywhere from $100 to $150 an hour, minimum 1 hour to have a job cut on a laser. So these gaskets would have cost me probably $200, $250, and that's pretty clearly something I don't want to do, at least not right off the bat. At that point, I would have to swallow the old pride and do business with someone I really don't want to buy stuff from anymore. Just is what it is. It's economics at that point. To address our next issue is of what material to use. I didn't have a lot of great sources for that either. I don't know what that was originally. It could have even been paper and it just turned to plastic. I have no clue. But just to make sure that we would get something that would hold up to the conditions that we could see in this hydraulic pump, I went ahead and went with this Buna N aramid combination material. And if you don't know aramid, that is the generic name for Kevlar. Kevlar is a registered trademark of, I think, DuPont. So whenever you see aramid, that's just generic Kevlar. So this is some pretty rowdy stuff. Will handle 1000 psi, has a temperature range of -100 to +400 Fahrenheit, and I don't think anything in there either gets that cold or that hot. And I think the whole hydraulic system on the tractor is only capable of generating like 800 psi, and I don't think that pump generates anywhere near that anyhow, especially right there. That G-rotor pump, I think, is basically just a suction pump for the pump that goes behind it that actually does the work. I think it's just a supply pump, so it's probably more like 60 or 80 psi, but since I don't know, I want to play it safe, and we got some King Kong material. But I think we're probably going to be okay. And I can already hear the thoughts of some of you fine folks out there of saying that you don't need to make a drawing of these and have them laser cut. You can just cut one out yourself. And yes and no is kind of the answer to that. The first thing is when you actually get down in the details of this thing, a lot of these are non-linear curves. And what I mean when I say that is these aren't like 2-inch or 3-inch diameter. These are actually just a spline. They're geometry of some other dimension where I can't just buy a tool to punch those out or anything like that. And especially this channel here where it's been damaged, and in fact this gasket is now really damaged. It's 2 pieces, so I've been handling it quite a bit. Getting a dimension off of that channel and getting all that just right is pretty much impossible, because as I have said previously, there's no mating feature for those on the pump or any of these plates or anything like that. So I don't even have anything to trace it out against, or stick a razor blade down in and cut out or anything like that. So it would have been pretty challenging to do that regardless. Plus, I still really don't have any clue what material this is or the conditions it needs to hold up to. So if I were to go down to the auto parts store, or the hardware store, or whatever, and buy a sheet of cork or a sheet of Felpro gasket material or anything, it may not actually be strong enough to hold up to this. This is a hydraulic pump. It's not just a car timing cover or anything like that. So I wanted to make sure I selected a material that would actually hold up to the job. And to do that, I was going to be into a $20 or $30 piece of material just to try and cut up by hand anyway. So I may as well let a laser cutter do it for me if I can. And again, if it wasn't this today, it'd be something else tomorrow or 20 years from now or whatever. So it was just kind of fun to get our process down for how to do something like this, just for me personally. Plus, once I have a drawing, I can do any number of darn fool things I want with that drawing, including give it away to people for free, which I am happy to do. If you want to email me at my address down in the description of this video because you'd like to have a DXF of this part, I'd be happy to email that out to you, no sweat at all. But another darn fool thing I can do is 3D print one first to see what our fitment and everything looks like to begin with. This goes right back to the design stuff. We don't do a lot of 3D printing on the channel, mostly because I don't own a 3D printer. It just so happens that right now, as you're watching this, is what I'm sure is going to be the world famous for years to come, COVID-19 pandemic. And as part of that, I was told to take a 3D printer home with me from work. So if we needed to print stuff in the time that we were all out of the office, we could, and I did that both professionally and a little bit personally. Just so you don't think I'm a pilfering swine, this printer needed some repair work and needed some tuning, so this was part of that process. But anyway, since I've made a drawing and I have a 3D printer, now I can make as many templates of this as I want and try different things. And I had considered trying to use this as a template to cut ones out, but again, just didn't appeal to me for the price of what it would cost to just have McMaster make them for me. And that is what happened. We got these shipped from McMaster for 47 bucks, and now I have 8 of them. As I said earlier, if I were to have bought that guy's gaskets, if I'd have known these would have worked or whatever, if he'd have worked with me, I'd have bought the first one at, whatever reduced shipping or whatever. And if it worked, I would have bought his other 2 for additional shipping charges just to have them. So I would have spent 50 bucks for 3. And instead I spent 47 for 8. I'm pretty sure my dad's tractor uses one of these 2 because his is an older model that's different than this one. And now I have spares, and for that matter, if you guys need one, hit me up in the email. We'll work something out. But the first thing about these things, I did have to wait a little while for them. McMaster said 2 to 3 week shipping, and I think they came in right at 10 days. And again, that's coronavirus timing, so maybe I could have got them in a couple days in regular time, but it did take a little bit to get them, so I've been waiting, and my yard looks really bad. The other issue that we talked about already is these are really thick, and I think you'll be able to see just the immense difference in thickness of these. I think we'll be okay because that's just going to shim this assembly out, which will push the drive shaft forward, but it shouldn't interfere. There's enough slack where that pin goes into the engine coupling that I think we'll be all right. And if we're not, we can always try and fudge something together. We're clearly not afraid of trying new things on this channel. But also one of the things I wanted to check by doing this is to verify the dimensional accuracy of the printer itself, because that's one of the things I was actually working on. So I've intentionally left the bolt holes in this 3D printed sample at basically 0 clearance to the bolts, so they're very, very tight. And I just want to see how this gasket that was made from a drawing off of a completely different machine, probably in a different state, just see how it lines up versus what the printer made. And it looks like it's pretty much bang on perfect. So that's good news in the investment in time as far as regards misappropriating company property to get the printer tuned up nice. This thing's running like a dream. But you guys aren't here to talk about 3D printers, and I don't think anybody really cares how the 3D printed one lines up, including me. We want to know how the real one lines up. So I've got the gasket installed on this backer plate. And the screw holes I did leave very, very tight on the gasket, and I also did intentionally oversize the gasket because it's not going to hurt for it to be just a little too big. I can go back with a razor blade or whatever and trim it down to size. I think we're in pretty good shape. I can see maybe just a little bit of the blue through these corners because these again are non-linear corners, so I just had to do my best. But I don't think there's any pieces there that are going to be so big that they're going to rip off and go through the pump and destroy anything. I think we're going to be in good shape. And I also did oversize these slots a little bit just to help prevent that. And you can see that right there, that the gasket's just a little bit too big, which is fine. And when I say a little bit, I mean I think I put a 0.5 millimeter oversize on it. So yeah, and you can pretty well see that on both those features, maybe not quite so much as this center hole. I think she's going to be good enough as long as it doesn't leak. I think we'll be in good shape. And as I said, we got plenty of spares. Pick a card, any card. It's pretty cool we live in this world. I keep saying these gaskets are laser cut, but the more I look at them, the more I don't think they are. Because we would see like a charred edge around the outside of them if they were. And I'm pretty sure that these aren't water jet cut because I don't think you could get away with it. I think a water jet would just destroy this stuff because this stuff really does, for all intents and purposes, just feel like cardboard. I'm tempted to contact the company that cut them because they came in the bag from the company that did it. This is apparently VSP Technologies, and ask them how they did this. And I know they didn't actually take a router to do it, like a CNC router to come in and do it, because CNC router bits are of course round, and you wouldn't be able to get that square cut down here that I designed onto it. Because the router bit's round, it would come in and leave a round corner right there. The more I look at these things, you can see all these little fuzzies around the outside, and they're only in one direction. They're only on this side of the gasket. It almost looks like maybe they did machine a tool and actually stamp these. I can't imagine that being cost effective for, the 40 bucks I spent to have all these made, but that's almost how it looks. So I think I am going to email this company and just ask them and see what they say. Because if they can do small lot quantities of stuff like this and other materials and stuff like that, we could certainly have a use for them in the future. So contact them I did, and the gentleman who responded to my inquiry just happened to be their director of operations. I don't know if this is a really small company and there are 5 people that work there, so everybody has a really impressive title or what. But by appearances, someone with a reasonable amount of horsepower is actually the guy that responds to, just basic customer inquiries. And I didn't tell them I make YouTube videos or that I was going to mention them in the video or anything like that, because it shouldn't make any difference. Plus, if they knew I made videos, they might actually come watch them and see what kind of a bumbling moron is using their stuff, and they might not want to sell them to me again. So I asked him how they made these, and he was kind of cagey with his responses, because the first thing he asked me is, well, tell me more about your company and what kind of uses you have for our products and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, bumbling idiot at home, scratching my butt, don't have a company, I just do stuff at home. These happen to be hydraulic pump gaskets for an obsolete product, and that's what I do, is I do stuff. And with that kind of answer, I can see why he would be a little restrictive in the sharing of information, because he doesn't know if I'm a competitor looking to pick his brain, or if, I'm basically just a tire kicker wasting his time, which I don't encourage any of you guys to do. Don't bug these guys unless you are serious about having some work done. What I was able to determine from that conversation, which he did not actually answer directly, is that they're using a vibratory knife to cut these, and I don't have much experience with that process, but my assumption is that it is what it sounds like. So there's a knife that's probably in here shaking at some ultrasonic frequency that's just kind of mining that stuff out. So that's a really neat process. I tried to pick his brain a little bit more for what kind of materials and what kind of other processes and stuff they might offer, and again, he was a little restrictive in his replies, and I get it, and it's cool. His basic answer was, well, we can cut pretty much anything you want up to several inches thick. Despite me being a guy at home, even he went out of his way to thank me for contacting them and asking the questions and everything. So they struck me as a no job is too small kind of shop. He also mentioned, they have in-house CAD designers that can help you design stuff like this. Basically, he just kind of gave me the standard marketing pitch, which again, that's cool. That's part of his job. But I will say, if you guys go with options more elaborate than those I showed you on the McMaster page, like if you do want them to help you design stuff or you do want a weird material, you can expect the cost to go up probably exponentially. This is legitimately the least expensive option that was available on McMaster, and it just happened to be a good material for me. So if you call them up and you say, yeah, I want a 1-inch thick billet aluminum block for whatever, you're probably still going to pay for that. But I had a really good interaction with these guys. The service they offer, at least through the McMaster portal, is just frankly amazing. Who would have ever thought you could do something like this for $50? I got a whole stack of these things. So if you guys ever need anything where these guys can help you out, go ahead and give them a call. They were very responsive and helpful when I did. So now I'm back to where I started from darn near a month ago in my time. For you, just a few moments ago, where I needed to order parts for this thing. I did order a new O-ring. I've got it right here. And I did go ahead and order this new front gasket and a new needle bearing. You can see there's a needle bearing down in there. But this gasket's still really nice and supple, and that needle bearing feels like brand new. It doesn't look to have much wear on it at all. So I'm just going to let these ride for now. And as you just saw, I got plenty of spare gaskets for this guy, so if we need to tear it back off later to service these, no problem. So what we need to do now is get this O-ring out of here and just clean this face up. It only seals on this O-ring groove, so the cleanliness of this face isn't that critical. I'm just going to spray this out with some brake clean and paper towel and try and be careful not to get any paper towel or anything down in those needle bearing needles, because that would not be any good for us at all. So I've got this thing about as cleaned up as I dare to, and the next trick is going to be to just very carefully pick this O-ring out of there. And I'm wondering how well you'll be able to see it on camera. You can actually see this O-ring is so smashed. Like when I do that, I can't even feel that there's an O-ring there, but it's actually so smashed it's pulling away from the corner there that there's actually a seam. For our purposes of removal, that might be handy, but it's not doing any good in terms of sealing. And this pick I have is way too big for this. 12 seconds ago there was a smaller one around, so of course now it's not. Smaller picks acquired. If you were to tell me this was an O-ring, I'd never believe you from how it looks. This thing's just totally flat. It's like it's been in there for 50 years or something. Yeah, she's good and smashed. See if you can see how flat that is. So now let's delicately take our paper towel and try and make sure there's no crunchies left behind in the channel for it, because we certainly don't want to tear our brand new O-ring. And that's another fun thing about O-rings and stuff like this, is these surfaces are almost always just razor sharp. So you have to be really nice and careful when you're installing new ones, or you'll just cut them on the way in. And that O-ring was like 10 bucks too, which is ridiculous. If I would have actually known what size it was, I could have ordered that from McMaster or any hydraulic shop for probably 3 or 4 bucks, but I don't. So there are actually some crusties down inside it. I'm going to try and blow them out of there with some brake clean and hopefully try to do it in a way in which I can avoid blowing it into that needle bearing. Try and keep it downhill. Take our towel and just hang on to it for a minute while hopefully any driplings come on out, kind of maybe get up in there and blot a little. Before I put this whole thing on, I probably will take some brake clean from the top and hit that needle bearing, just to pray I didn't get anything in it. I don't know. I'll have to think about that one. It may be better just to leave it alone. So anything that looked kind of suspect at all, I just went around with my pick and just kind of lightly, so you don't want to affect the surface if you can help it, just kind of lightly went around and hit with the pick, and then kind of used the pick as like a Q-tip and sort of lifted it out of there. But I think that channel is about as clean as is reasonably possible to get it. Maybe just a little more booger over here from paper towel or something. So I think that's about as good as we're going to do. The next thing, and none of you guys get too excited, you haven't bought me dinner yet. So we're going to take some generic Vaseline here, and we're just going to grease up that O-ring a little bit, just so it has the opportunity to kind of slip and move if it wants as we put it together. And I think I'm probably going to coat our custom-made gaskets with a little bit of this too, for the same reason, just so it can kind of float around a little. And a really tiny amount of Vaseline mixed with 2 gallons of transmission oil isn't going to hurt a single thing, so I think we'll be okay. She's 10 years past expiration, boys. I hope we don't give this thing gonorrhea or something. Fun little fact about this trick. Way back in the day, meaning pretty much before my lifetime, my dad was quite the mechanic. He was ASE master certified in, I think, everything. Mostly did a lot of diesel stuff, a lot of heavy equipment, and was also Allison transmission master certified tech. And if you're wondering, yes, that's the same Allison transmission today. You see on the side all those expensive Duramax trucks that are out there rolling around. And he initially kind of suggested or taught me this trick or whatever, because he used to rebuild automatic transmissions, and instead of put gaskets in them, reassemble them with Vaseline, and then run through them with compressed air instead of transmission oil. So then he could make sure that everything in them worked right before he put them back together. Or he'd run through the valve bodies on them to make sure they worked right, which worked out just great, according to him. I don't have a reason to doubt that. It sounds cromulent to me. Funny story on that one is when he and my mother started dating, and my dad's like this to this day. If he's out and about and he needs to get something done or wants to do something, he will just make a stop no matter what he's out and about doing for the most part. They were out on a date, and my dad said, I just need to stop off at the drugstore for a minute. And she said, okay. And they both went in together, and my dad walked up to the counter at the cashier with 10 jars of Vaseline and his teenage date. Yeah, I think mom was like 19 at the time, and my dad would have been like, 22, 23, something like that. My dad bought multiple gallons of Vaseline on a date with my mom before they were married, which is pretty hilarious. I've got another great date story about mom and dad's dating career. We'll save that one for another day. But anyway, this is what we're looking for. I think I'm just going to go ahead and smear some all around this face, just because why not? Just give it a chance to have a nice, happy life. Keep some rust down, if anything. But she's in there. She's not rolled over. You want to make sure your O-rings aren't twisted or sitting funny when you put them in. And if you're ever doing any other hydraulic equipment or anything, sometimes these O-rings have a profile. Like they'll be square, so you have to make sure they're put in the correct way. This one's just round, so not much to worry about. But yeah, she feels much better. I can actually like feel an O-ring when I go over the outside. We'll go ahead and give her a good hearty push down in there. Feels good. So I don't think she's going to bind up or give us any trouble on reinstallation. Ready to roll. Our next mission is going to be just to do our best to try and just clean this up just a little bit. It's been sitting here dripping oil for a month while all this stuff was torn off. And I would prefer to keep crap out of the ports of it if I can. Probably should have put some painter's tape or something on it. And I'm not planning to replace the fluid in this thing, but I am going to spin out this filter down here. It runs a hydraulic filter on the transmission, so we will put a new filter on it and top it off. At the end of the day, this is a tractor, guys. It's going to be dirty no matter what I do. Only so much that can be done. Let's get our new guy greased up a little bit with some Vaseline. And while I do that, why not tell you the other fun mom and dad were on a date story. So this would have probably been about 1972 or so. And at the time, my dad had a 71 Grand Prix SJ, which was a 455 powered Pontiac. And 71 in Pontiac was right before they killed all the power from them. So apparently this car was supposed to be pretty quick. To this day, it's the fastest thing my dad's ever had by far. Car was gone long before I came into the world. But anyway, they were out on a date one night in the Grand Prix, and they pulled up to a stoplight, and up next to them pulled up what would have been probably about the same age Corvette. I happen to know this car was a 350 3-speed auto car, and my dad had been known to drive Spirited with my mother in the car before, so she didn't know if there was about to be a drag race or what going on. There was some seedy figure over in the Corvette, as you often find in Corvettes, seedy figures within. And this was at night, so she couldn't see into the car or anything like that. And then pretty much out of the middle of nowhere, a bottle of Boone's Farm. If you don't know what that is, that's like the cheapest wine you can buy, kind of like Kool-Aid with booze in it. Bottle of Boone's Farm comes out of the window of the Corvette, gets past my dad. My dad takes a swig off of it, and again, this is a very different time back then. This is the early 70s. You know, things have changed, and in this case, for the better. Dad takes a pull off the bottle and hands it right back to the guy. Doesn't say a word to my mom about it. So this random dude just pulled up at a red light, hands my dad a bottle of wine. He takes a pull off of it and just hands it back to the random guy. And it turns out this was one of my dad's buddies from work. And I happen to know that car is a 350 car because that buddy was the only one that he would allow to work on it was my dad. So yeah, it was my dad's buddy Rick from work pulled up and handed my dad a bottle of wine out on the road while he was out on a date. My mom didn't quite know what to make of that at first, but one of the Max family crest stories now, forever in the lineage. So yeah, maybe mom thought that was so funny that she decided to stick around. Maybe I wouldn't be here if not for that bottle of booze coming out of that Corvette. Who knows? So there you go, you get two funny mom and dad stories. The first one, making my dad look like he was a pervert, which he probably is, but not for that reason. And the second, making him look like he's a drunk, which he's not. He's never been much of a hard drinker. More extraneous detail for you that has nothing to do with tractors. Anyway, we've got this guy nice and greased up now. You can see I'm not just absolutely loading it up or anything. That's not the goal. I'm basically just giving it some chapstick. I've gone over to my toolbox and grabbed a couple sockets that fit in the holes. I believe that is the correct orientation for it, although I'm not sure that it matters. I don't remember if this slot was up or down. I think it was down. I'll probably verify that before I put it all back together. I can always review my video. One of the handy things about making videos. Just going to slide it in there and stick the socket in the bolt hole, like so. I've got another socket that doesn't fit quite as well for the other bolt hole, but it does work. And that'll just keep that in place for us for a few minutes while we work on the other stuff. Speaking of other stuff, this is the G-rotor housing and the G-rotor, and I've just taken a light coat of Vaseline and put it on that as well. I haven't packed it full of Vaseline. You'll hear about guys doing that with their oil pumps and stuff. You shouldn't do that. I've just put enough in there that it's not going to start dry, and I don't want to use oil because then I'll just be dripping oil everywhere. Likewise, I've just put a little bit on the face of this gear, and I'll probably put a little bit on the other side when we get it installed. And I'm also going to just put a little bit on the face of this Deuterino here. Same reason. We just don't want stuff to run dry. In this case, it might actually help us to be a kind of an anti-seize too. Prefer not to have an excess of it down in those slots, but I'm just going to take the drive pin for that gear and see if I can scoop some of that out, just like so. Make sure I get any crusties off of this that I can. So that's looking pretty good. That's pretty much what I'm after. It goes on like so. I believe this guy will just slip right over past my sockets. Yep, sweet. Now we're living large. So our next tidbit, I believe to be our gear. And we need to put the pin in for it. It looks like we can just barely get the pin in with this thicker gasket installed, which is much better than not being able to get the pin in. I was a little worried about that, so I'm glad that it's not going to be an issue. Turn that to make our lives a little easier. Okay, so our pinhole is pretty much horizontal now. Made sure our pin's all nice and clean. And there it is in the hole. Try and make sure we get our gear back in the way it came out, although I don't think it matters a ton. Yeah, this is, I believe, the transmission side. So I'm going to once again just chapstick my gear a little bit, basically. Get him slid back on, make sure it's engaged in that drive pin or things won't go our way at all. And there it is. Cool. Put our housing on. And the housing, all this stuff, fortunately has these flats, and that's a machined flat on the side of the transmission too, so you know which way they need to go. So now we just need to be pretty careful putting this guy on because we don't want to damage our front seal or our needle bearing. So just taking it easy, and it should just slip right past those sockets as well. There we go. So it's in the needle bearing. I need to try and get into the seal. Feels like it's kind of wanting to fight me. Wonder if it's held up on the gear. Yeah, it might be. See if I can spin the gear a little. Not sure if I actually spun it. Okay, there, I for sure did spin it. Perhaps too much. So I'll just have to keep working this gear until I get the mesh lined up. I think that's what's holding us up. Or I might have to take my sockets out so I can just rotate the whole thing. Yeah, I think the odds of me getting this just right with these sockets in it are pretty low. I'm going to actually have to turn it to get it on. That Vaseline will probably kind of hold it there anyway. There it is. There we go. Now I need to be careful trying to get it past the front seal. No big deal. There it should be. It looks like we'll have plenty of room to get our pin back in, just so that doesn't try and take off anywhere on us. We'll just slip our sockets back in. We get our bolts and torque wrench and stuff ready. So I've got everything set up. I'm going to take my magnet on a stick, and this is the one that I did a quick review on that's got this shroud on it, so it shouldn't want to stick to stuff beside it, namely the housing. I don't want to pull it off. We're just going to pull our sockets out one at a time. and put bolts in. Grab our other one. I'm just going to use the Milwaukee because it's the ratchet I can reach. I'm not going to get these tight. I'm just going to use it like a regular ratchet if I can. Maybe a little. There we go. And the service manual says 52 foot-pounds on these and to pull them down evenly. And especially since we're using this weird gasket. Yeah, for sure evenly. Okay, so those are both pretty much snug. And I have my 3/8 torque wrench here set to 20 foot-pounds. We're going to bring them up in stages just like you might head bolts. And I'm just going to go back and forth until one of them clicks. Fairly surprised these aren't clicking yet. There it went. That's 20 on that one. That's 20 on that one. All right. I've reset the wrench to 40. That one clicked. And that one clicked. Here comes 52. Let's hope they don't shear off. That would suck a lot. Okay, that's that one. And that one. Check them again. Yep. Yep. All right. 52 foot-pounds. And before I run it, it'll probably end up being another day or two just because I got some other things going on too. I'll recheck those to see if there's any compression set on that gasket. So if that gasket like squishes overnight, it might not be as tight as it should be. So I'll check them. And then after we run it, I'll probably check them again. But so far, everything's looking good. I think we're going to be in okay shape. So I did get the orientation of the blue gasket wrong. It is intended to have that big slot to the top. So I had to reverse it over to get it to be the right way. And I also got something else wrong earlier in the video. The extra tolerance stack from the thickness of this gasket is actually just going to push our entire front oil pump forward a little bit, which I don't think is going to hurt. And since this gear just runs on that pin right there, the gear is actually allowed to float some front to rear. Like right there, it's still engaged on that pin and it's way off the housing. Back here, it's, you know, full on. So it has to come out until like right there before it's totally off the pin, and that's like an 1/8 inch. So I think we'll be okay. Probably not ideal, but I don't think it's going to hurt anything. Just wanted to correct myself from earlier when I was saying that it might impact the drive shaft length. It won't change any of that because that's all dictated by the shaft. I just wasn't thinking about it the right way. Get our drive shaft adapter and make sure it's not going to like crash into the front of the seal, because that would also suck just from that extra thickness. I think we're going to get lucky because the hole in it seems biased that way, which is the direction we would want. Spin this guy so he's a little easier to access. I think we're going to be okay because I can see the hole pretty well. Geez, that pin is just whipped. Probably get a new one. But for right now, it's what we got. See if we can move this around a little more so we can actually swing it with a punch. Turns plenty stiff. I don't remember how it turned before. I don't think it was any too free. Oh yeah, that's going to be fine. Cool. Give her a little tap, tap, taparoo here. There we go. And I can wiggle the shaft so I know it's not bound up on the front. I can just like barely see light through there. Drive that pin so it's a little more centered. There we go. That feels like a pretty big victory to me because I've been waiting to do this for like a month, like I told you guys. I wonder if I can show you. You can just see a gap between the drive adapter and the front housing here. See that shiny line? So they're not hitting, but just barely. That extra 54 thousandths isn't doing us a lot of good. See if I can wiggle it enough to make it contact or anything. Nope. Maintains the clearance. Turns pretty stiff, but it was probably that way before. And of course I can turn it by hand. And this thing runs on a motor that makes 30 foot-pounds of torque. So I certainly don't, at least not with my hands. I can actually hear that Vaseline I put in there kind of squishing around. And I didn't put very much in. We're going to leave that sit overnight. And we'll come back and check the torque on those bolts tomorrow. And it has been exactly 1 overnight. So let's see about getting some torque reapplied. It actually did take just a little bit, and so did that one, just a touch. So we may want to retorque these a couple times. I believe it's time to move on to getting the drive shaft put back in it. Drive shaft time is really not that big of a deal. We want to stick an end of it right back in there in the engine coupling where it came from, and then we're going to slide it on back and bolt it up to the flange adapter here at the transmission. The biggest thing to be wary of when we do this is to not break our cooling fan, because as we discussed last year, these cooling fans are very fragile and they're pretty expensive. So we just want to be delicate with it. Don't drop it. Watch, I'll drop it and shatter it into a million pieces now, but let's hope not. So we've got that back in the motor side, and it's just hanging out in that coupling. I, of course, haven't put the pin in it yet. We're going to take our fiber disc here. This would be like a universal joint on a car, but you know, not. Just allows for some misalignment. And I just want to get a nut and bolt and such started on this stuff, just so it doesn't fall out of there and break our fan. And then we can rotate the motor or whatever we want to do to get it lined up to put the pin back in the drive side. So that shouldn't run away from us. Let's see how we're doing on our pin. Yeah, it looks like the motor or the shaft needs to turn a little bit one way or another. It looks like the motor needs to come back. See if we can do that easily or not. So I'm gonna have better access to do this from the opposite side of the tractor, so I'm gonna bias it that way. We just got her lined up right there. See if we can get it started. I believe it's just barely started. Probably gonna have to move our light. Sorry about the impressive camera angles on this channel, especially on this tractor. There's only so much I can do. Okay, I think that's probably pretty good. It looks like we've got about half the stick out on each side, kind of what we want. And it looks like I should probably be getting a new engine adapter there. That one's really whipped. Something to worry about another day. So now we're back at our drive shaft end. I believe I've mentioned previously these are self-locking nuts. However, self-locking nuts doesn't mean forever. They do wear out, and these are in fact worn out. I've ordered new ones, and they are gonna end up being like 4 or 5 days later than promised. So for right now, we're just gonna put it back together with these nuts, and then I'll just change them out quick later. I'm a little concerned about how hard that pump turns. I'm hoping that's just a byproduct of the Vaseline. Maybe it's creating a suction that it wouldn't have. Let's see if we can just get one of these snug and then kind of use it to turn. Okay, it's coming around. Boy, it is stiff though. Again, growing concerns about that. We'll see how it feels when we kind of get everything back on. I also know that some of this is just paranoia because I know I'm doing something weird. It might be tight, but not dangerously tight, and I'm just overblowing it in my mind. Plus, it's already been a month since I spun this thing over in any other way, so I already don't remember. So I've just got a wrench on the engine drive flange adapter, and I'm trying to spin it from back here. Of course, I have a crap angle to do that. It'll spin, but it's not too happy. No, I know that's not a hard up contact. You can see it move freely. I can't think of a reason the gears in there would be bound or anything. Watching the demise of a Cub Cadet hydrostatic rear end before your very eyes would not surprise me. Well, that's better. I think maybe I could just get a better grip on it. What's an odd sound? It didn't come from back here. It came from something up front. Oh, I'm trying to break my cooling fan because I'm stupid. The shaft's all bound up. It goes up here like this. All right, so I've got all those bolts back in and tightened up, and it actually does feel like it's turning a little bit better, but it still seems stiff. So I think the next thing we're gonna do before we continue on is I'm just gonna pull the spark plug out of the motor. We're gonna throw the battery charger on this thing, and we're gonna just run this pump over with the starter and let it get some fluid back up into it, or see if it makes really bad grinding noises and stuff like that. So now I've got the spark plug out of it, most of the crap off of it that could fall on the floor. Let's see if the battery has enough juice in it just to crank it. We're just gonna bump it a few times at first, and hopefully no pieces go flying off. Ooh. Well, that could be our battery, or that could be something bad happening. Let's put the charger on it. Decided to go with the jump box here because ain't nobody got time for 12 hours of battery charging right now. Let's just see if it'll crank. And if you remember from our cold start video, this thing didn't want to start very well then either, and that was before I did anything. So even if it doesn't turn over, this is still not conclusive. We're just going to give it a shot and hope it turns over. That's a firm no. The starter is turning inside the belt, so we may just need to tighten up our belt to turn this guy over from the front of the engine with the starter generator belt, which I did just tighten up. And it is stiff, but it doesn't feel like it's bound. It just feels stiff because it's not like it gets easy and then hard. It's just kind of always hard. So now I'm just turning it over with a wrench on the starter. So now I have a lot of mechanical advantage, which is a little dangerous for what we're doing here. But mostly I don't feel any tight spots. It's like it's uniformly all tight. I'm gonna try and be as quiet as I can and see if I can hear anything. You know, I can hear the motor coming up on compression. You know, I hear the piston moving in the bore. I don't hear anything from back here. Let me see if I can feel anything. Well, boys, I don't hear anything. I don't feel anything. I think it's fine. I'm probably going to put a ratchet on the starter here and just keep turning it over by hand several times and see if maybe that Vaseline is creating a vacuum. I really do think that's what's going on. Probably not the best idea I've ever had. So we got our belt tightened up. I've got the jump box back on it. I turned it over a bunch by hand and it feels okay. It's just tight. So let's see if the motor will just crank it. Yep. That snapping you're hearing is the plug wire arcing against the motor. But I'm just going to crank it for a while and see if it'll develop oil pressure up there maybe. And even with the jump box, I think it's about all the battery's got to offer right now. So let's get it on the charger for a while and assume everything's fine. So just to be thorough, I've decided to go ahead and try and turn it over like by hand. This would be the normal way, in my opinion, is I would always have to do this with a screwdriver. And it does seem to be moving quite a bit more freely now. Except of course the camera is exactly where I want to be. Story of my life. All right, we'll go Renegade shaky cam then. There we go. That's a little more like it. Yeah, that feels pretty good. That's about what I would expect. So yeah, I think we're going to be okay. I think that Vaseline is just creating a vacuum on the back of that gear rotor assembly we put in, probably the outer gear. So it's probably, I don't want to say dragging, but it's probably sucking itself down to that outer housing. Once we get some pressurized oil in there, it'll probably clean up all that Vaseline and go, or it'll destroy the pump. We'll find out. I have just noticed a new problem though. Our dowel pin on our drive shaft down here is loose. She knows stay in. There's absolutely no tension on that because our drive shaft is so beat and this connection is so beat. We don't have a lot of good options to deal with that today, and we got to mow. We're like a month behind, like legitimately. So I'm probably going to put a pipe clamp around that just to hold it in there, which is something you probably should not do. And then I'll look into seeing what I can do to get replacement parts for that stuff, or a hose clamp rather. So this is for sure one of those do as I say, not as I do times on the channel. This is not something I would ever suggest anyone do, and I shouldn't do it, but I'm out of time and I'm out of choices. I won't be leaving it like this forever. I'll be trying to get some proper parts or get them fixed or whatever, but that's going to keep that dowel pin in there so we can mow. It's really not even a safety risk or anything because this is all shrouded. There's a, the gas tank and everything goes over this, and that had never come through any of that. I don't think it's really going to give us a problem, and I'd bet you money that this is also not the first time a Cub Cadet has ever had that repair. That said, I don't really like doing stuff like that on this channel. There's enough bad work in the world already, and I don't like being a guy to contribute to that. But with that said, there's also a time and a place for just about everything, and it's also good to see people that just show you how to get stuff done. Well, I think that's quite enough bad work. Let's get back to doing some good work. Right here, I've got new locking nuts to put on this drive disc collar. So I've said it before, and I've mentioned last year for sure, that these lock nuts wear out over time. So we ordered up some new ones, and these are, of course, if you guys know me, stainless. And these bolts are already all slathered and enough anti-seize that we shouldn't have any galling problems. So let's get them thrown on. And there we go. Got them all changed out quicker than a box of wine through my ex-girlfriend. You can see I didn't have to like overly crush this rag joint to get the hardware tight because now the nuts actually lock. And it pretty well looks like that all the way around. See, that one's not looking too terribly crushy squashy. And the next guy coming around, he's looking pretty good as well. Take my word for it, they all pretty much look that way. We're good there. So I just did some quick research, and the drive shaft is available brand new. You can buy replacements that I kind of assume are craft made, but you can also get them right from IH or MTD, and they're $80. The flange adapter you can buy from MTD, or there are craft made versions. There's a craft made version on eBay that is CNC machined out of tool steel and then heat treated so they don't wear out. And those are $60. So between the shaft and the adapter, you're into this for like $140 to replace those two. Normally, when you're talking about drive shafts and stuff on these tractors, this fan will be broken and this drive disc coupler will be broken too. So by the time you replace all that crap, you're into this for, I would bet, $200, $250. A lot of these tractors don't even sell as a whole tractor for $200 or $250. Not that I'm particularly complaining, because this stuff has lived for 50 years. And if you put new stuff on, it'll probably live another 50 years. But this kind of stuff is one of the reasons why I tell people not to buy these tractors, unless you really are just into it as a hobby and you just have a love for working on these things. They are just mind-blowingly expensive. And in what will be part of a different video on just kind of annual maintenance type of stuff to do with these tractors, I've already swapped out the hydraulic oil filter with a new one and refilled the transmission. So I think we're good to start it up and see if we shoot sparks out of the transmission or make grindy, crunchy noises or what. And of course, not shooting oil out everywhere would be nice too. Let's give it a shot. My battery junk. Of course, I flipped the seat up to look at the battery voltage while I'm cranking it, and try and crank it again, it tries to take off. So who knows? Let's try it again. Come on. You bag of turds. It was cranking just fine like 12 seconds ago. I'm gonna put the jump box on it. The battery voltage was dipping to 10 for whatever it's worth, so this battery might be smoked. Jump box is on it. Third time's the charm, right? Oh, you turd. Anyway, do you guys see any sparks? Is it blowing oil everywhere? I don't know. Let's try it again. Well, I had it running for 10 or so minutes total, with about 7 or 8 minutes at full RPM. So it turns out that's all the gas that's in it. And this housing and stuff's warm, but it's not hot. I expect it to be warm. And I did wipe this down once at the midway point, and I don't think that's actually leaking. I think that's Vaseline cooking out of there. And more importantly, I don't think our blue gasket is leaking. This was the test. This part, if it leaks, then well, then maybe there's something wrong with the housing. But the factory part number O-ring and everything's in there, and it was installed okay. So when I first lit it off too, I noticed that my check valves up here were leaking a little bit. That's actually a comment I got last year. Somebody said, oh, these things are leaking. It's like, man, I don't know if they're really leaking that much. And while the tractor was running, I just popped the buttons a couple times and they quit leaking. It's possible they are leaking, but they're certainly not going to sit there and leak like a whole cup of oil over the winter. So what I think we're going to do now is put some clean paper towels under it and leave it sit for the night and see what it looks like tomorrow. So everything under the tractor is completely covered in filth, meaning the cardboard it's sitting on. So that white you see down there is a bunch of fresh white shop towels sitting on top of a cardboard box that's probably 4 inches thick. So if it drops a bunch of stuff overnight, we're going to find out. Regardless, I didn't hear any screechy scratchy noises and any of that stuff. And if I don't find parts laying on top of that paper towel tomorrow, we're probably going to be mowing the grass. Because I'm telling you guys, I don't know how well it'll come across on camera, but we are way behind. Most of this stuff is probably over a foot tall. It's pretty bad. Like this goofy little wooden thing in the backyard, I guarantee you that thing's at least 10 inches off the ground. You can see those weeds or the grass or whatever is taller than it is. And my neighbors have mowed a few times and they're not looking nearly as bad. But yeah, this is way out of hand. So if there aren't parts laying under it tomorrow, we're mowing. And it is also worth mentioning that while it is still warm, I went ahead and stuffed a screwdriver down in here and turned the pump over by hand. And when I say by hand, of course, I do mean with the screwdriver. And it turns the way it should. It's nice and free now. So I'm going to go ahead and say for sure that putting Vaseline on the gears wasn't an awesome idea. Probably should just use a few drops of gear oil for that in the future. But I think today I got away with it. Or this thing will quit moving in 3 weeks. We'll find out. Well, it's Judgment Day. The thing's been sitting here overnight, and I don't see any signs of a gross fluid leak up at the top. Let's just roll the thing forward and see if our box is covered in oil or parts. Looks like we collected a few drops, maybe more than a few on the rear of that paper towel. The stuff on the rear is weird because that box was sat pretty far back. But either way, the thing's got to get mown grass today. So I rolled it back forward to approximately where it would have been sitting, just to see if I can kind of eyeball up where those drops are coming from on the tractor. And it looks for all the world like it's leaking out of that pipe still, but I don't know how it could be. We tried to seal it up twice. Unless something's cracked. I don't know. We've got that like mass of oily grass back there. I suppose it's possible it's residual just from having stuff apart, but I don't think so. That rear leak is pretty severe. So now that I look at the thing, it looks like everything back here is kind of wet. God, and it is just soaked. I'm just going to take some of this towel and start wiping that off. See if anything becomes more apparent. So I'm getting everything kind of as wiped off as I can. The real truth of the matter is we're probably not going to see anything until we get this thing pressure washed. It's just so dirty and covered with oil everywhere. But there aren't parts hanging off of it, so screw it. We got to mow. Hang on. That little drip puddle right there and that little dash behind it is all this thing has accumulated in the last 4 days. And you can see a little drip on further up there. That just showed up last night. I went out and mowed with this thing for probably 2.5 hours. This was a full tank of gas. And ew, looks like there's some nasties in my gas tank I should probably get out of there the next time I take it off. But you can see that tank, or I hope you can see that tank, is basically empty. So you guys that are familiar with these tractors know that if you run a full tank of fuel through one, you've put it through some work. It's been out there running and working hard. And that amount of leakage, to me, basically means no more leak. I think what we really did have going on is that was all just residual that was held up in all that old greasy grass and all that crap. So I think we've accidentally stolen victory from the jaws of defeat here. As of yet, I've still not had a chance to pressure wash the thing, which we'll probably be getting to in the next week or so. But I think that what we're seeing really is just residual. And if it isn't, like the song says, she's close enough to perfect for me, boys. So this one, at least for me, was quite the emotional roller coaster. We had tears of joy and pain here. This whole transmission leak saga has been going on for 2 years, technically 3 years. And it all started when I broke that suction tube down at the bottom that comes up into the pump. And I think I probably never had a leak there, and it was always coming out of that housing, and it was just a case of unfortunate timing that kept leading me back to that same problem. But I think this time we actually got it licked, which is hella sweet. And past that, I think we did it with some pretty cool solutions. Having that gasket custom made and stuff, at least for me, was a lot of fun. You know, it's a lot more fun than just mail ordering something, and a lot cooler of a thing to share for the channel, maybe give you guys some ideas of the type of capabilities that are out there in the world that are changing every day. There's all kinds of neat stuff just right around the corner, and who knows what next year's going to bring. So it's kind of cool that we have projects like this that kind of push us past our boundaries and into those kind of things where we can experiment with new stuff, or we're forced to look at it. So I know by the time I get done, this is going to be a really long, drawn-out video. It's not going to be for everybody, but I really hope you guys enjoyed it all the same. And as always, I appreciate you stopping in, and we'll catch you on the next one. I'm Max, that's Saddington Bear, and we make videos like this all the time. Here are a couple links to some other videos we've made, and we really appreciate you guys stopping in.